Taking someone's life is considered one of the most vile crimes in our society. Murder can be triggered by things like jealousy, revenge, or greed. But sometimes such a heinous crime defies logic. Tonight we present you a case that is hard to beat in terms of brutality and cruelty. The Hinterkaifeck murders occurred on the evening of March 31, 1922, in which 6 inhabitants of a small Bavarian farmstead, located approximately 43 miles north of Munich, Germany, were murdered by an unknown assailant. The 6 victims were Andreas Gruber, 63, and Cecilia Gruber, 72, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, 35, Victoria's children, Cecilia, 7, and Joseph, 2, and the maid, Maria Baumgartner, 44. The victims were found beaten to death. The perpetrator lived with the 6 corpses of their victims for 3 days. The murders are considered one of the most gruesome and puzzling unsolved crimes in German history. Strange things began to occur in and around Hinterkaifeck sometime shortly before the attack. 6 months before the attack, the family maid quit. It has been widely claimed that her reason for leaving was that she had heard strange sounds in the attic and believed the house to be haunted, but this is unsubstantiated. Nothing in her statement to the police suggests this. Andreas Gruber found a strange newspaper from Munich on the property in March 1922. He could not remember buying it, and thus Gruber initially believed that the postman had lost the newspaper. This was not the case, however, as no one in the vicinity subscribed to the paper. Just days before the murders, Gruber told neighbors he discovered tracks in the fresh snow that led from the forest to a broken door lock in the farm's machine room. Later during the night they heard footsteps in the attic, but Gruber found no one when he searched the building. Although he told several people about these alleged observations, he refused to accept help and the details went unreported to the police. According to a school friend of the 7-year-old Cecilia Gabriel, the young girl reported that her mother Victoria had fled the farm the night before the act after a violent quarrel and only hours later had been found in the forest. On the afternoon of March 31, 1922, a Friday, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived at the farm. Maria's sister had escorted her there and left the farm after a short stay. She was most likely the last person to see the inhabitants alive. It appears that in the late evening, Victoria Gabriel, her 7-year-old daughter Cecilia, and her parents Andreas and Cecilia, were lured to the family barn through the stable, where they were murdered. One at a time. The perpetrator, or perpetrators, used a mattock belonging to the family farm and killed the family with blows to the head. The perpetrator moved into the living quarters, where with the same murder weapon he killed Joseph, sleeping in his bassinet, and Baumgartner, in her bedchamber. 4 days passed between the murders and the discovery of the bodies. On April 1, coffee sellers Hans Skierowski and Edward Skierowski arrived in Hinterkaifeck to place an order. When no one responded to the knocks on the door and the window, they walked around the yard but found no one. They only noticed that the gate to the machine house was open before they decided to leave. Cecilia Gabriel was absent without excuse for the next few days of school and the family failed to show up for Sunday worship. Assembler Albert Hofner went to Hinterkaifeck on April 4 to repair the engine of the food chopper. He stated that he had not seen any of the family and had heard nothing but the sounds of the farm animals and the dog inside the barn. After waiting for an hour, he decided to start his repair, which he completed in roughly 4.5 hours. Around 3:30 p.m., Schlittenbauer sent his son Johann, 16, and stepson Joseph, 9, to Hinterkaifeck to see if they could make contact with the family. When they reported that they did not see anyone, Schlittenbauer headed to the farm the same day with Michael Pohl and Jacob Siegel. Entering the barn, they found the bodies of Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia Gruber, his daughter Victoria Gabriel, and his granddaughter Cecilia, murdered in the barn. Shortly after, they found the chambermaid, Maria Baumgartner, and the youngest family member, Victoria's son Joseph, murdered in the home. Inspector Georg Reingruber and his colleagues from the Munich Police Department investigated the killings. Initial investigations were hampered by the number of people who had interacted with the crime scene, moved bodies and items around, and even cooked and ate meals in the kitchen. The day after the discovery of the bodies, Court physician Johann Baptist Allmuller performed the autopsies in the barn. It was established that a mattock was the most likely murder weapon, though the weapon itself was not at the scene. Evidence showed that the younger Cecilia had been alive for several hours after the assault. She had torn her hair out in tufts while lying in the straw. The skulls of the victims were removed and sent to Munich, where they were further examined. The police first suspected the motive to be robbery, and they interrogated traveling craftsmen, vagrants, and several inhabitants from the surrounding villages. When a large amount of money was found in the house, they abandoned this theory. It was clear the perpetrators had remained at the farm for several days. Someone had fed the cattle, eaten the entire supply of bread from the kitchen, and had recently cut meat from the pantry. With no clear motive to be gleaned from the crime scene, the police began to formulate a list of suspects. Despite repeated arrests, no murderer has ever been found and the files were closed in 1955. Nevertheless, the last interrogations took place in 1986 before Kriminalhauptkommissar Konrad Müller retired. In the inspection record of the court commission, it was noted that the victims were probably drawn to the barn by restlessness in the stable resulting in noises from the animals. A later attempt, however, revealed that at least human screams from the barn could not be heard in the living area. On the night after the crime, 3 days before the bodies were discovered, the artisan Michael Plöckl happened to pass by Hinterkaifeck. Plöckl observed that the oven had been heated by someone. That person had approached him with a lantern and blinded him, whereupon he hastily continued on his way. Plöckl also noticed that the smoke from the fireplace had a disgusting smell. This instance was not investigated and there were no investigations conducted to determine what had been burned that night in the oven. On April 1 at 3 a.m., the farmer and butcher Simon Reislander, on the way home near Brunnen, saw two unknown figures at the edge of the forest. When the strangers saw him, they turned around so that their faces could not be seen. Later, when he heard of the murders in Hinterkaifeck, he thought it possible that the strangers might be involved. In the middle of May 1927, a stranger was said to have stopped a resident of Wahofen at midnight. He asked him questions about the murder and then shouted that he was the murderer before he ran into the woods. The stranger was never identified. Although it was a difficult investigation with no evidence, there were various suspects. Karl Gabriel, the husband of Victoria Gabriel, Karl Gabriel, had reportedly been killed in Arras, France by a shell attack in December 1914, during the First World War. However, his body had never been recovered. After the murders, people began to speculate if he had indeed died in the war. Victoria Gabriel had given birth to Joseph illegitimately in her husband's absence. 2-year-old Joseph was rumored to be the son of Victoria and her father Andreas, who had an incestuous relationship that was documented in court and known in the village. After the end of the Second World War, war captives from the Schrobenhausen region who were released prematurely from Soviet captivity claimed that they had been sent home by a German-speaking Soviet officer who claimed to be the murderer of Hinterkaifeck. Some of these men later revised their statements, however, which diminishes their credibility. Many theorized that this Soviet might be Karl Gabriel, because those that claimed to have seen the man after his reported death testified that Gabriel had wanted to go to Russia. Lawrenceschlittenbauer. Shortly after the death of his first wife in 1918, Lawrenceschlittenbauer was believed to have a relationship with Victoria Gabriel and Father Joseph. The initials LS appear on Joseph's birth certificate, though these could be the initials of an attending doctor. Schlittenbauer came under suspicion by locals early in the investigation because of his several suspicious actions immediately after the discovery of the bodies. When Schlittenbauer and his friends came to investigate, they had to break a gate to enter the barn because all of the doors were locked. However, immediately after finding the 4 bodies in the barn, Schlittenbauer apparently unlocked the front door with a key and, suspiciously, entered the house alone. A key to the house had gone missing several days before the murders, though it is also possible that Schlittenbauer, as a neighbor or as Victoria's potential lover, might have been given a key. When asked by his companions why he had gone into the house alone when it was unclear if the murderer might still be there, Schlittenbauer allegedly stated that he went to look for his son Joseph. Regardless of any of the above rumor, it is known that Schlittenbauer had disturbed the bodies at the scene, thus potentially compromising the investigation. For many years after, Local suspicion remained on Schlittenbauer because of his strange comments, which were seen as indicating knowledge of details that only the killer would know. According to reports in the files for the case, local teacher Hans Lager discovered Schlittenbauer visiting the remains of the demolished Hinterkaifeck in 1925. Upon being asked why he was there, Schlittenbauer stated that the perpetrator's attempt to bury the family's remains in the barn had been hindered by the frozen ground. This was seen as evidence that Schlittenbauer had intimate knowledge of the conditions of the ground at the time of the murders, although being a neighbor and familiar with the local land. He may have been making an educated guess. Another speculation was that Schlittenbauer murdered the family after Victoria demanded financial support for young Joseph. Before his death in 1941, Schlittenbauer conducted and won several civil claims for slander against persons who described him as the murderer of Hinterkaifeck. Bickler brothers and Georg Siegel. The former maid Crescens Rieger worked from November 1922 about September 1921 on Hinterkaifeck. She suspected the brothers Anton and Karl Bickler to have committed the murders. Anton Bickler had helped with the potato harvest on Hinterkaifeck and therefore knew the premises. Rieger said Bickler talked to her often about the Gruber and Gabriel family. Anton reportedly suggested that the family ought to be dead. The maid also emphasized in her interrogation that the farm dog, who barked at everyone, never barked at Anton. In addition, she reported speaking with a stranger through her window at night. The maid believed that it was Karl Bickler, the brother of Anton. She thought that Anton and Karl Bickler could have committed the murder together with Georg Siegel, who had worked at Hinterkaifeck and knew of the family fortune. Supposedly, Siegel had broken into the home in November 1920 and had stolen a number of items, though he denied it. He did state that he had carved the handle of the murder weapon when he was working at Hinterkaifeck and knew that the tool would have been kept in the barn passage. Many books and newspaper articles have been devoted to the murders. A series of articles by Joseph Ludwig Hecker in the Schrobenhausener newspaper revived interest in the murders. A documentary film, Hinterkaifeck Symbol of the Uncanny, 1981, is based on the Leuschner book. Hans Fiegert adapted the book, directed the film, shot on Super 8, with sound, and was the cameraman. The film was shown regularly in Ingolstadt. 10 years later, Reinhard Kielich's play Hinterkaifeck, Germany's Most Mysterious Murder Case, 1991, was produced, and at the same time Kurt K. Heber produced another documentary, shot on location. In 2007, the students of the Police Academy in Fürstenfeldbruck examined the case using modern criminal investigation techniques. In 2017, the last chapter of The Man from the Train by Bill James and his daughter Rachel McCarthy James briefly discusses the murders at Hinterkaifeck. The authors explain the possibility that the German crimes might have been committed by Paul Mueller. The titular serial killer the authors believe killed several families in the United States under similar circumstances between 1898 and 1912. The murders attributed to Mueller, including the Villisca axe murders, were apparently random nighttime home invasions in or near small railroad towns that left entire families bludgeoned to death with the blunt end of an axe, and were probably motivated by a sadistic and necrophilic attraction to prepubescent girls. The authors rate the chances of Mueller as the Hinterkaifeck killer as more or less a toss-up but conclude there's no real reason to believe that it's not him. In the meantime, a new generation of hobby criminalists is discussing the perpetrator question in internet forums. And the active ones even find starting points for new research, even if the professionals decline. The evidence of the crime is definitely no longer available, said Michaela Fordberg-Zankel from the Fürstenfeldbruck Police College, summarizing the result of a student project in 2007. There are no more evidence of the crime scene. That's the problem. DNA analyses are therefore of no help. Exhuming the dead in the Wauhofen Cemetery to take DNA samples does not help, says Konrad Muller. The retired chief commissioner had been investigating for decades out of private interest. It pains him that his colleagues did not even secure fingerprints in 1922, although the method was already fully developed in 1909. For the technical college students, however, after their operative case analysis, one thing was clear: the trigger for the act was a personal, emotional conflict. Everyone who turned the horror topic into novels, films and plays interpret the facts in this direction. What really happened that day? Which person wipes out a whole family and gets away with it? If people hadn't treated the crime scene so negligently at the time, there might still be a chance to resolve this gruesome crime almost 100 years later. Do you think one of the suspects was responsible for the crime? Or was it someone else entirely? Whoever killed these poor people has unfortunately never been found, and who knows what other gruesome crimes the perpetrator has committed. If you enjoyed what you saw today, please consider to like the video. If you help us in this way, we can continue to work on interesting mysteries and tragedies. Have a nice and calm night shift. See you next time.